that should cover it." My father's voice cut across the restaurant, and everyone at the table went quiet at once. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're new here, please subscribe, because what my father did at that dinner was only the surface of something that went much deeper than I ever could have imagined. My name is Adley, and I was 28 years old when I walked across the stage at my convocation ceremony at the University of British Columbia. 3 years of nursing school. 2 of those years spent working overnight shifts at a care home in Surrey, just to keep my student loan from running out faster than it already was. I had applied for every bursary I could find. I had taken the bus to clinical placements because I couldn't afford car insurance. I had graduated with honors, and I had done it entirely on my own, which is not the kind of thing you should have to say about your own education, but there it is. I want you to understand something about my father before I tell you what happened. He was not a man who was openly cruel. He was something quieter and harder to name than that. When I was accepted into the nursing program, he said, "That's a stable job, I suppose." When I made it through second year with a 91 average, he said I should make sure I wasn't sacrificing the practical skills for the grades. He had a way of finding the ceiling of any room I walked into and pointing me toward it, not to help me reach it, but to make sure I knew I wasn't there yet. I had started university twice. The first time, I left in second year because I ran out of options. My student loan hadn't covered the full cost, the bursary I was counting on didn't come through, and when I called my father and asked if there was any way he could help me through the semester, he said there was nothing. I moved back to Surrey. I worked for 2 years, saved what I could, and re-enrolled at 24. Which is already a kind of grief that nobody tells you about. Watching your peers move forward while you start again. My mother died when I was 11. She had been sick for nearly 2 years before that, and in my memory the last stretch of it lives in specific details. The smell of the hospital on Granville, the sound of monitors, the way she would hold my hand and whisper that she was going to make sure I was taken care of. I was too young to understand what she meant. I thought it was something parents say. She died on a February morning when the snow was coming down sideways off the straight, and after that it was just my father and me in a house that had gone very silent very fast. He remarried when I was 14. My stepmother was the kind of polite that doesn't come from warmth. It comes from the effort of tolerating a situation you didn't choose. Their son, my half-brother, was 6 years younger than me, and he grew up in a way I never had. Private school in North Vancouver, hockey camp every summer, a car on his 16th birthday. I did not resent him for any of it. He was a child. He hadn't made any of those choices. But I noticed. I always noticed, and I kept my mouth shut about it the way I kept my mouth shut about most things. My grandmother, my mother's mother, lived in Kelowna, 4 hours east by car. She drove to Vancouver whenever she could, and when she couldn't, she called. She was the one who came to my convocation at the Chan Center. She wore the blouse she kept for milestones, and she cried when they called my name. Actual unashamed tears running down her face in the middle of that auditorium, and I loved her for every one of them. My father was there too. He sat in the row behind my grandmother with my stepmother beside him, and he watched the ceremony the way you watch something you've been asked to attend. Afterward, we went to a restaurant in Kitsilano, his choice. We ordered food and the conversation stayed careful, the way it always did when we were all together. My stepmother talked about their trip to Palm Springs. My half-brother scrolled under the table. My grandmother held my hand across the tablecloth and told me my mother would have been beside herself with happiness. Then my father reached into his jacket. I thought it was his phone. It was an envelope. He slid it across the table without ceremony and said, "That should cover it." I picked it up. Far too thin. Inside were $200 in cash, 2 bills. I looked up at him. He was already reaching for his water glass. "Dad," I said, and then I didn't know what was supposed to come after that. He set down his glass. "You're a registered nurse now. You'll be on a proper salary soon." He said it the way someone states something self-evident. 200 is more than fair for where we are. I was aware of the table going quiet in a particular way. The way that means everyone has heard and no one wants to be the first to acknowledge it. "More than fair," I said. "Don't make it into something it isn't," he said. His voice dropped, but not enough. "You've always had a way of doing that." I put the envelope down. I did not pick it back up. My face was doing something I couldn't control, so I looked past him toward the window and the traffic moving along Cornwall, and I held very still inside myself, the way I had learned to do when I was young. My grandmother's hand found mine across the tablecloth. Her grip was firm. I looked at her, and her expression stopped me. Not the sympathy I expected, but something older, something that looked almost like guilt. She leaned slightly toward me and said, barely above a whisper, "Come to Kelowna this weekend, come alone." "Why?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not here." My father made a comment about dessert. The conversation moved on. I sat through the rest of that meal, holding everything very still, because crying in front of my father had never given me anything, except something else to be dismissed for. I drove home to East Van that night, and cried for the full 20 minutes. I made the drive to Kelowna that Saturday. The Coquihalla was clear, early October, no snow yet, and I pulled into my grandmother's driveway just after noon. She was already at the window. She opened the door before I reached the step. Her kitchen smelled the way it always did, like coffee and something baked that morning. But she didn't pour coffee. She didn't ask about the ceremony or the dinner. She walked to the hallway closet, stood on her toes, and reached up to a high shelf I had never paid any attention to. She brought down a shoebox held shut with an elastic band. She set it on the kitchen table and sat across from me. "Your mother gave me this before she died," she said. Inside were documents, a copy of my mother's will, a letter in her handwriting, addressed to me in an envelope I had never seen before, financial statements with my name on them from an account I had never heard of, and a letter from a law firm in Vancouver, dated the year my mother died. My grandmother explained it slowly. When my mother was sick, she had made careful arrangements. She had a life insurance policy. In her will, she had established a trust, the insurance proceeds combined with her personal savings, held separately, to be used for my education and my future. My father had been named trustee. He was responsible for managing those funds and using them for my benefit. She trusted him, my grandmother said. We both did. He was your father. I was looking at the statements. There were numbers on them. How much? I asked. She told me the original amount. Just over $93,000. I sat with that for a long moment. $93,000. I thought about the afternoon I called my father from Surrey and asked if there was any way he could help me stay enrolled, and he said there was nothing. I thought about the student loan I would be repaying for years. I thought about every overnight shift, every skipped meal, every scholarship application I wrote with shaking hands at 2 in the morning. He told me there was nothing, I said, when I had to leave school. I asked him directly, and he said there was nothing available. My grandmother didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been carrying a stone for a very long time, and had just set it down. I should have asked him directly years ago, she said. I trusted him to do what your mother wanted. I'm sorry, Adley. I am so sorry. I reached across the table and held her hands in mine. I wasn't angry at her. She had believed what she had every reason to believe. My mother had trusted him. My grandmother had trusted him. Neither of them had done anything wrong. I took copies of everything and drove back to Vancouver in a quieter place than I had been in a long time, past sadness, into something colder and clearer. I had a friend who worked in financial compliance in a firm downtown. We had met during my second run at university, when we lived in the same residence building for a semester before she graduated and moved into her career. I called her that evening and asked if I could come over. We spread everything across her kitchen table. She read carefully, asking questions, pointing to what each document said and what it implied. The will was clear, a testamentary trust, my name as sole beneficiary, my father named as trustee, the original balance confirmed, and then the withdrawals. Dozens of them, across more than a decade. Mortgage payments to my father's address in North Vancouver. 7 years of private school tuition charges for my half-brother, 2 vehicle purchases, international trips, Cancun, Portugal, Hawaii, a kitchen renovation in 2018, transfers described only as family household expenses. Not one withdrawal referenced my education, not one referenced my name. Before you do anything, my friend said, you need the complete records, you need everything, and you need a lawyer. She helped me draft the formal requests that night, to the financial institution named in the trust documents, and to the probate court registry in BC where my mother's estate had been filed. When I clicked the final confirmation, I sat staring at the screen with my hands in my lap, and for the first time I stopped wondering whether my father had lied to me. I started waiting to find out exactly how much of my life had been built on top of that lie. There was one thing I had to do before the records arrived. I needed to look at him. I drove to North Vancouver on a Sunday afternoon without calling ahead. He answered the door in a fleece vest, surprised but not alarmed. We sat at the kitchen island and talked about ordinary things, my new position at the hospital, his work, whether I was settling into the apartment. He even asked whether I had spent the $200 yet. I said not yet. Then I mentioned, as casually as I could, that I had been going through some of my mother's old papers my grandmother had kept. His face changed. Not dramatically, he was not a dramatic man, but something tightened around his eyes. "What kind of papers?" he said. "Legal documents, from the estate." He picked up his coffee mug, set it down. "That was nearly 20 years ago." "I know. I was just curious about the arrangement she made." The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, something happened in his face that I had always misread as irritation but now recognized clearly for what it was, the particular stillness of someone calculating. "There's nothing there worth going through," he said. "Everything was handled at the time." "Was there a trust?" I asked. "Who told you that?" I said I had found some paperwork. He said the paperwork was old and taken out of context. He said I had always had a habit of looking for problems that weren't there. He said he had worked very hard for this family, and I would not find it useful to dig through things I didn't understand. I nodded. I thanked him for the coffee. I left. I sat in my car at the end of his street for a long time, breathing. I had not gotten a confession. I had gotten something worth more, confirmation that the subject made him afraid. My grandmother gave me the name of a lawyer she trusted, a woman who practiced in Kelowna with a background in wills and estates. I booked an appointment and drove out again with everything I had. The lawyer read through all of it without speaking. When she looked up, she said the same thing my friend had said. "Let the records speak." She explained the legal framework plainly. In BC, a trustee has a fiduciary duty, a legal obligation to manage trust funds exclusively for the beneficiary's benefit. Using those assets for unrelated personal expenses could constitute a serious breach of trust with significant legal consequences. She told me not to contact my father directly again, and to wait for the full records before taking any formal step. 3 weeks later, the records arrived. The lawyer called me before I opened them, and asked me to come to her office. I drove to Kelowna on a Thursday. I sat across from her while she opened the package. The complete trust history was worse than the partial statements had suggested. The original balance, $93,400. The closing balance at the time of inquiry, $3,800 and change. The 12 years between those two numbers were filled with itemized withdrawals. Mortgage shortfall payments on my father's house, 7 consecutive years of private school fees for my half-brother, 2 vehicle purchases, 4 international family vacations, a full kitchen renovation, and dozens of smaller amounts described only as miscellaneous household. Not one line referenced education, not one line had my name in it. I turned the pages slowly. I thought about the night I called my grandmother from Surrey and told her I couldn't re-enroll. She had offered me a few $100s from her own savings. I had taken it and felt ashamed for weeks afterward. I thought about the bursary application that covered 3 months of groceries. I thought about the loan agreement I had signed, knowing I would spend years paying it back. All of that had happened while there was a trust account in my name, established by my mother because she knew she would not be there to take care of me herself, and it had been spent, year by year, on someone else's life. The lawyer closed the folder. "We have a choice," she said. "A formal court application or a demand letter first to allow for negotiation. Either way, the documentation is strong." I looked at the folder one more time. "I want my family to know," I said. "All of them. Before anything is filed, I want him to answer for it in front of everyone." My grandmother agreed without hesitation. She called it a belated convocation dinner, said she wanted to do it properly in Kelowna now that the dust had settled. My father accepted the invitation without suspicion. My stepmother confirmed they would make the drive. My half-brother said he would come up from Vancouver. I spent 3 evenings preparing the documents. My friend helped me organize the withdrawals by year and category, printing 2 complete sets, labeling each folder clearly. I did not want anyone at that table to accuse me of exaggerating. Every number would be there, every date, every description. The night before the dinner, I sat in my grandmother's spare room, with a stack of folders on the bed beside me. She knocked on the door at 9 o'clock and looked in. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm not sure yet," I told her honestly. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the folders, then at me. Your mother made those arrangements because she knew she was running out of time, she said. She did not want you to have to fight for a fair start. She wanted it to simply be there for you, the way it should have been. I nodded. My throat was too tight for anything else. She squeezed my shoulder once and went back to the kitchen. I sat there alone for a while, looking at the documents that my mother had meant for me, that I was only now holding for the first time at 28. The envelope with the $200 was still in my bag. I had not spent it. I had not been able to bring myself to. Everyone arrived at my grandmother's house by 6 the following evening. My father kissed her on the cheek and said the drive had been smooth. My stepmother brought wine. My half-brother set the table without being asked. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched and told myself to stay level. Dinner moved the way family dinners always do in my family. Careful conversation, managed silences, nobody saying anything real. My father talked about a project at work. My stepmother asked about the hospital. My half-brother told a story about his recreational rugby league that made my grandmother laugh. I ate and said very little and waited. When the plates were cleared and coffee came to the table, I stood up. There's something I need to talk about, I said. With all of you. My father looked at the folders beside my chair. His face changed. I'd like everyone to just listen first, I said. I opened the first folder and placed my mother's will in the center of the table. I showed them the relevant pages, the trust, the terms. My name is sole beneficiary, my father's name is trustee. I gave everyone time to read. Then I laid out the account statements. I walked through the opening balance, then the withdrawals, one category at a time. I read the descriptions out loud. 7 years of private school tuition, 4 international vacations, 2 vehicles, a kitchen renovation, mortgage shortfall payments at my father's address. Nobody spoke. My stepmother's face had gone pale. She looked at my father, then she looked back down at the page. My father said the money had been used for the family. He said I had been part of the family, and these expenses had benefited everyone. He said running a household cost money, and that I had never been asked to contribute to any of it. His voice was steady. His hands were not. I asked him to show me one withdrawal that had gone toward my education. He didn't answer. I asked him why. When I had to leave university and called him for help, he told me there was nothing available. He said I was trying to humiliate him. He said I had never appreciated what he had done. He said he had kept a roof over my head, and I was choosing now, after everything, to treat him like a criminal. My grandmother looked at him from across the table. She opened her mouth and then closed it again, as if she couldn't find any words large enough for the moment. My half-brother had been reading the pages the whole time. He looked up at my father, then he looked at me. You had to leave school because of money? His voice was unsteady. For 2 years, I said. He looked back at the documents, then back at my father. My father had no answer. I didn't know, my half-brother said. He was looking at me, not at anyone else. I didn't know any of this. Something in the room broke open quietly when he said that. No dramatic moment, just a scene giving way. My father pushed his chair back. He said we had all decided to see the worst in him, and that he had given this family everything he had. Then he picked up his jacket and walked out. The door didn't slam. He simply left. No one moved for a moment. My stepmother put her face in her hands. My grandmother set down her coffee cup carefully. My half-brother looked at me across the table, with an expression I had not seen on his face before. I'm sorry, he said quietly, whatever I can do. I had spent years imagining what it would feel like to say all of that out loud. I had thought there would be relief, or something bright and clean. Sitting at that table with the document spread in front of us, I mostly felt tired, and then beneath the tired, something smaller, like a window that had been painted shut for a very long time had finally moved, just slightly, in its frame. The legal process moved faster than I expected. My father's lawyer contacted the estate lawyer within 2 weeks of the dinner in Kelowna. He did not want a courtroom. The negotiation took several months, but an agreement was reached. A significant portion of the funds still legally recoverable under BC's limitation period were secured against his assets. It was not everything my mother had left. Some withdrawals were too old, but it was enough to pay off my student loan in full, enough left over to put a down payment on a small place in East Van, the neighborhood I had been told for years I would never be able to afford. My grandmother called me in the spring. She told me she had updated her will. She said she wanted me to know now, not later, and that she was sorry it had taken this long to say so plainly. My half-brother and I speak more than we ever did. He asked me once, a few months after the dinner, whether I blamed him. I told him the truth, that I never had, not for a moment. He was given things he had no idea were taken from somewhere else. That was not his fault, and it was never what I was angry about. We are still finding our way to something, the two of us. I think we will get there. My father and I have not spoken since Kelowna. Some days that feels like a loss. Some days it feels like the first honest thing in a long line of dishonest ones. I am still figuring out the difference. The envelope with the $200 from the restaurant in Kitsilano sits in the top drawer of my desk, next to my nursing registration certificate, and a photograph of my mother that my grandmother gave me last Christmas. I kept it because I couldn't decide what to do with it, and then one morning I realized I was keeping it because of what it represented. The moment my father looked at me and decided that $200 was what I deserved. He was wrong. The record said so, and so did every year I had built before I ever knew those records existed. Every overnight shift, every bursary application, every early morning I showed up anyway, because my mother had raised someone who kept going. She knew what I deserved. She wrote it down. She made sure it was in a legal document with her signature on it. In the end, that turned out to be enough. Before you go, one question. If you had been in my place, would you have taken the settlement, pushed it all the way to court, or walked away from the whole thing entirely? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And subscribe if you want to stay. The next story has been sitting with me for a while, and I think it's time to tell it.